Season 4, Episode 1 of SpongeBob SquarePants Fear of a Krabby Patty is one of my personal favorite episodes of the entire series. Is it the best episode? I don't know, but I can't remember a time when I didn't have a particular fondness for it. It always just felt funnier and more enjoyable compared to other episodes I'd seen, both in the actual jokes it tells, but also in how the episode looked. Even as a kid, I couldn't help but notice that this episode just looked different, and I was never really able to put my finger on what it was. Now, it's certainly not uncommon for a cartoon's art style to shift with a new season, and SpongeBob is by no means an exception. This is often a result of animators, artists, or storyboarders leaving and getting replaced with new staff members. Or, and we see this most with shows that started before the 2000s or in the early 2000s, the switching from cell animation to digital animation. And with this being the first episode of Season 4, you probably wouldn't question it if you were just watching the show in order. But after the episode ended, it would play the sister episode, Shell of a Man, and it's there we see an immediate return to the more typical animation style we're used to. And that's how the style remains for the rest of the season. So it always confused me as to why the characters looked so different in just this one episode, and we never see this style return again. Well, as it turns out, this shift in style was the result of animator C.H. Greenblatt taking the reins on the storyboarding for this episode. For those who don't know, Carl Harvey Greenblatt is an American animator, storyboard artist, voice actor, writer, producer, and director. He has worked on Nickelodeon's SpongeBob SquarePants and on Cartoon Network's The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and Evil Con Carne. He is the creator of Cartoon Network's Chowder, Nickelodeon's Harvey Beaks, and creator and executive producer of Jellystone. Before SpongeBob, Greenblatt had worked on TV commercials, so it seems that this show was the first step in his career of working on cartoons. Greenblatt's first SpongeBob credit is as an assistant storyboarder for Season 1's episode, Bubble Stand, and he would maintain that role for the remainder of the season. Outside of Help Wanted, Reef Blower, and Tea at the Tree Dome, Greenblatt is credited in every episode of Season 1, and those three that I just mentioned all collectively make up the first episode, so he was brought on pretty early in the show's life. In Season 2, we see Greenblatt credited as a storyboard artist and writer, but he worked on far fewer episodes and only seemed to work on the second half of the season. And in Season 3, while his credits indicate that he was promoted to storyboard director, he wouldn't be working on the show for much longer. I mention all this because Fear of a Krabby Patty is actually Greenblatt's final credit as an artist for the show. Now, he would provide the voice for Carl in the Season 4 episode Selling Out, and he did some work on the storyboard for the second SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, but Fear of a Krabby Patty marks the end of his active work on the show. As plagiarized earlier, Greenblatt would eventually work on The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy as a storyboard artist, and would later create several of his own cartoon series, Chowder, Harvey Beaks, and more recently Jellystone. So it's pretty safe to say that Greenblatt has found success as a cartoon creator and artist. Looking at the art styles and character animation of those other shows, you can definitely see some similarities between them and the styles of Fear of a Krabby Patty. And while I can't find any official source confirming this, my guess is that Greenblatt was able to take more control over storyboarding and animation for his final episode as a sort of last hurrah. Because even though this wasn't his only credit as a storyboard director, it is definitely the only episode where his animation style seems to take over. You can actually find the storyboard version of this episode on YouTube, which includes a deleted scene that I'll discuss later. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. Okay, now let's talk about the actual episode. I have kept you waiting long enough. Plankton is put up a sign outside of the Chum Bucket, saying that it is now open for 23 hours a day. Mr. Krabs, not wanting to be outdone, announces that the Krusty Krab will now be open for 24 hours. We find out that Plankton put that sign up so Krabs would see it and try to one-up him by keeping his restaurant open for longer. Plankton's logic is that if Krabs forces his employees to work continuously with no sleep, it'll get SpongeBob to crack, making it easier for him to accidentally reveal the Krabby Patty secret formula to him. On day 10 of nonstop service, Squidward asks if he can go home, but SpongeBob is still as lively as ever. After 43 days of patty flipping with no breaks and no sleep, SpongeBob has fully cracked and starts having frightening visual hallucinations of the people around him being replaced with giant Krabby Patties. It's so intense that he can't even look at a normal Krabby Patty without screaming, so Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob to go see a psychiatrist. Plankton swoops in and poses as a therapist, saying that he'll help SpongeBob get rid of his patty phobia. After many failed attempts to get SpongeBob to reveal the Krabby Patty secret formula, Plankton tries hypnosis. He manages to put SpongeBob to sleep, but he can't get him to wake back up. While he's asleep, SpongeBob dreams of getting eaten by a giant patty before waking up in his bed as another patty approaches him. It turns out that this patty is here to give SpongeBob some milk and cookies to help his brain. This cures SpongeBob of his patty fear, and we fade back to the real world where we see Plankton yelling at SpongeBob to wake up. SpongeBob wakes up peacefully and, believing that Dr. Langton's therapy has worked, returns to the Krusty Krab.
Therapy doesn't really work. You're still sick. Very, very sick.
So that's the basic summary. I'll go a bit more in depth later, but before I get into the actual analysis, I need to establish that this episode is genuinely hilarious. Like, I wish I could talk about every joke that made me giggle, but there are so many that I probably just end up showing the whole episode. I'll try to sprinkle some clips throughout the video to keep you on your toes, though. So, on to the analysis. This episode focuses on the mental deterioration of the Krusty Krab employees, more specifically SpongeBob, after having been forced to work for 43 days without any breaks or sleep. Now, many people in the past have tried to break the record for going the longest amount of time without sleeping, but the most famous instance of this was in 1964. The record was set by 17-year-old Randy Gardner, who stayed awake for 11 days, or 264 hours, as part of an experiment studying the effects of sleep deprivation. After beating the record, Randy was taken to the hospital where he slept for 14 hours, and he only woke up because he had to go to the bathroom. And later that night, he would sleep for another 10 hours. Now, believe it or not, sleep deprivation, not good for you. Staying awake for more than 24 hours can have negative effects on our attention span, decision-making skills, memory, and mood, among other things. If you've ever stayed up all night, or otherwise haven't gotten much sleep, you've most likely experienced one or more of these side effects, and they usually go away after a good night's rest. But Randy Gardner was awake for 11 days, and SpongeBob was awake for
43.
And of course, the more sleep-deprived you are, the worse the side effects become. In addition to the worsening of the symptoms I just listed, psychological effects of severe sleep deprivation can include fatigue, impaired judgment, paranoia, and hallucinations. While Randy Gardner did experience cognitive deficits during his experiment, none of them were really long-lasting. However, decades after the experiment, Randy reported in an interview about his experiences with extreme insomnia. The test had come back to haunt him. So let's go back to everyone's favorite Sponge. We see in the episode that on day 11, while Squidward is pleading to go home, SpongeBob seems completely unaffected. Remember that these new hours were put in place because Plankton tricked Mr. Krabs into doing so. So when Plankton sees that SpongeBob is fine, he calls in an order of 10,000 Krabby Patties. And the best part?
No breaks.
Now listen, I don't care how much you love flipping patties. Performing mindlessly repetitive tasks for over a month without a single break would probably make any person die of exhaustion after making them go insane. So, the days go on, and SpongeBob keeps flipping, while Plankton patiently bides his time, waiting for the sponge to crack. And on day 43, he finally does. SpongeBob is barely capable of making proper food anymore, and is acting frantically and bizarrely, not even noticing when Krabs walked into the kitchen. SpongeBob has been awake for so long, doing nothing but making Krabby Patties, that it's caused him to have visual hallucinations of other people turning into giant Krabby Patties. He's so frightened that even the sight of a normal-sized Krabby Patty causes him to scream in terror. Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob that his brain is all zonked and that he should go see a professional.
Wrestler?
No.
Plankton sees that his plan is actually working, and he hits SpongeBob with a flyer airplane, and, under a fake name, advertises himself as a psychiatrist who specializes in Krabby Patty phobias.
Wouldn't I have to miss work if I went to see you?
So, SpongeBob goes over to the Chum Bucket disguised as a therapist office. And it's here that we see the full extent of SpongeBob's cognitive impairments. He walks right into Dr. Peter Langton's office that's in the exact spot where the Chum Bucket would be. Yet he remains completely unaware that this is all a ruse. Anyway, Dr. Langton has SpongeBob start with a simple exercise.
Jumping jacks?
SpongeBob closes his eyes and says that he sees giant Krabby Patties filled with hatred. Terrified, he hits Dr. Langton with a piano.
Wait, where'd you get that piano?
Next, they try word association, and surprisingly, SpongeBob isn't scared during this. All we see is that he's a fucking idiot. Then, Dr. Langton lays out cards with pictures of kitchen utensils and ingredients on them. After subtly suggesting to SpongeBob that he use the cards to make a secret formula of some kind, SpongeBob makes a piano. In a final attempt to extract the formula from SpongeBob's head, Dr. Langton must resort to his most powerful method of curing him:
Fiber?
No. Hypnosis.
Hypnosis?
hypnosis. He hypnotizes SpongeBob and puts him to sleep, but when he tries to wake him back up, he's unsuccessful. SpongeBob is out cold. We then see a dream sequence of SpongeBob getting caught in a jellyfishing net by a giant patty before it eats him. And this is where that deleted scene I mentioned earlier would have been. In the storyboard version, SpongeBob wakes up in a cave where an entire horde of patties takes him away and plops him into his bed. SpongeBob has another encounter with a giant patty, but instead of eating him or showing him meat made horrors beyond his comprehension, the patty comforts him, giving him a cookie pizza and a glass of chocolate milk. SpongeBob no longer fears Krabby Patties. But I don't think he ever did. After returning to the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob himself says that all he needed was a good night's rest. He was never actually afraid of Krabby Patties. His brain was just so wonky from not sleeping for 43 days that he started hallucinating giant patties, which would understandably scare anybody, even SpongeBob. Remember that extreme sleep deprivation can result in serious cognitive deficiencies, which can make you easily irritable, paranoid, experience hallucinations, or incapable of thinking critically and clearly. And yes, while we see SpongeBob happy to be back to normal at the end of the episode, Mr. Krabs jokes that 23 hours was enough. But he wasn't joking. He tells SpongeBob to get back to work, and the episode ends.
No, seriously. Get back to work.
And you see, this is where I think I got it wrong about what this episode is truly about. At first, I thought it was all about a deep dive into SpongeBob's subconscious through Dr. Langton's Freudian-style therapy. But now that we know that all SpongeBob needed was some rest, I've realized that we've been focusing our attention on the wrong character. It is my personal theory that Fear of a Krabby Patty is actually about showing Mr. Krabs for the true villain that he is. Oh sure, Plankton is the one being framed as the villain, but all he wants to do is commit industrial espionage. No harm there. And sure, Mr. Krabs is the one who tells SpongeBob that he should seek professional help, but that's only after telling SpongeBob that getting back to work will fix the problem. He only suggests SpongeBob seek help when he realizes that it's interfering with his ability to make patties. We all know that Mr. Krabs is a selfish man, who will do virtually anything for money, even if it's quite literally at the expense of his own employees. But I want to take it one step further. I believe that deep down, under that tough outer shell, is a man who is deeply insecure. The episode starts with Mr. Krabs changing the Krusty Krab's business hours to 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., or a 17-hour workday. That's already illegal, but then he sees the sign Plankton has put outside the chum bucket and responds with this.
So, that little piece of flotsam Plankton thinks he can stay open longer than me, does he?
Sure. I don't know. Why not?
Well, he's wrong!
Oh, okay, sure.
As of now, the Krusty Krab is open 24 hours!
Mr. Krabs is well aware of how much more successful he is than Plankton. Yet the moment he feels like Plankton is trying to outdo him, he overhauls his entire business's work schedule. He's made a fortune running his business with normal work hours, but the moment he senses danger, or that someone else is trying to one-up him, he panics and chooses to retaliate. Krabs isn't just greedy. He's a man who will force his employees to work for 43 days straight with no breaks, just so he can say he's the bigger crab. He only sent SpongeBob to therapy so he could get right back to work, not because he cared about his well-being. Remember earlier when I talked about how Randy Gardner experienced horrible insomnia later in life as a result of his experiment? Well, SpongeBob was awake for almost 4 times as long. One can only imagine the horrors he has waiting for him down the line.